Welcome to the first in a series of 1+1 interviews focusing on leadership. Who in Australia leads these days? Who by their actions inspires us? Who by their judgment can we trust? Well, our first guest certainly ticks those boxes. His name is Charlie Magnuson. Now, Charlie is the local fire captain here at Bawley Point on the New South Wales South Coast. Bawley Point has been my summer home now for 34 years. Now, Charlie will tell you he's not exceptional, but you be the judge of that. But he is typical. He's typical of the hundreds of fire captains all around Australia who this summer stepped up during the worst bushfires this country has ever seen.
Tonight, under attack, homes destroyed and towns under threat.
Felt like 50-metre walls of flames coming at you. Sat as long as we could until it was just time to get out.
We've still got a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of potential for this still to come in on us.
Charlie Magnuson, welcome to 1+1.
Thank you, Barry.
Let's start with the day that the fire threatened Bawley Point. It was December the 5th.
Yep.
Where did that fire start?
Well, the original fire, which is the Currowan fire, started between the Clyde Mountain and the Clyde River with a lightning strike.
So that's about an hour, more than an hour from here.
Yeah, yeah, and it's part of our area, so we go right out to the Kings Highway, our area, so yeah, it can take a long time to get to those fires.
And how much warning did you get that Bawley Point was under threat?
Well, the first few days, it's inaccessible, that fire, so we couldn't get in there with manpower, so we had to sit back and wait till it came out to a spot where we could attack it. But unfortunately, the weather changed and it marched the fire straight to the river, and eventually it jumped the river. Once it jumped the river, that's when we knew that, well, whether we would be directly impacted, but we knew the highway eventually would be impacted, because being out there so often, you saw the dry conditions, the fuel on the ground, you just knew this is a fire that we've been expecting for some years.
So how serious was the threat in this area?
Well, the threat eventually came to Bawley Point, obviously, but it's marched along down to East Lynn via Kyla, and then eventually we were probably the first village to be impacted by the Currowan fire. On the day, it seemed like a horrific event for everyone in Bawley Point and even us firefighters, and as you probably saw around the shed was surrounded by fire. So it was a real threat. We had a few lucky things happen. We were very lucky to have a lot of resources, being the first village impacted. We had heaps of resources thrown at us.
Well, you've told me that Bawley Point was probably the luckiest village on the South Coast, and that was one reason. The other was that you had a sort of a natural fire break at a property near here.
Yes, Willinga Park Equestrian Centre, owned and operated by Terry Snow. It's set up out on our western border of Bawley Point, and that has been an amazing fire break. We fought a fire on the southwestern border on the Monday night, the 2nd of December. Huge fire in the national park, and if that whole area had been the same as it was 10 years ago, I have no doubt it would have marched into Bawley on the Tuesday and probably obliterated half of Bawley Point. Yeah.
And it's a stark difference when you see it down there, that you've got the forest burning it, and then you've got this natural open space, which would have acted as it would have slowed the fire down at least. Well,
it stopped the fire coming, from the southern side across to the northern side and down into Bawley Point. He's got, I think it's 2,000 acres up there that are well manicured, and he's done a great job. He's got plenty of trees, but they're thinned out. There's no crowning effect. There's no scrub and bush for that fire to take hold. We will praise him now that what he's done. It's, the village is still here because, well, that is one of the main reasons the village is still here.
And that held the fire up until the southerly arrived, and that was the third factor that worked in your favour.
Yes, well, the fire came around the northern side, and then as soon as it jumped the lake, we knew we were in trouble. I called for air support, and we had heaps of crews on the ground here. We all went back to property protection to ensure the village and the people in the property were safe. And then, as the fire hit the main road here in Bawley Point, Marmarang Road, the southerly blew in like something from God.
This is what confronted residents of Bawley Point when the fire front hit. Firefighters were the last line of defence as giant flames came thundering towards homes.
There's one tree on Murrumbering Road. Half of it is burnt and the other half is not. It shows you the moment that the southerly arrived.
Exactly right. I was on Murrumbering Road and I just kept thinking until that southerly arrived, I'm just thinking we're going to lose half the village here, and then bazinga, he turned up the southerly, and good for us, not so good for our neighbouring village to Barrie, because that sent the fire marching up to them, which,
Let's go back one day, December the 4th. You got a distress call. There was a fire at Termeal. Now that's about 5 k's from here on the other side of Princes Highway.
Ended up being one of our own firefighters who stayed to protect his property, and that ended up being quite a dangerous little rescue.
So how bad was the drive on the way in?
His driveway goes basically up a mountain, quite narrow. We had the big truck on that. There's no room to manoeuvre, and there was fire on both sides of the road, and you can tell by looking at the truck with the mirrors melted and that on it. Halfway up, my driver looked at me and said, "What are we going to do?" And we said, "Well, you can't stop here, mate. You've got to just keep going." So we went all the way up.
But he had no way out without your help?
No, he was stuck there, and I think most of us believe that he probably would have perished if we hadn't got into him because of his asthma from the smoke. It took us a bit of time to get him on the truck, and when we got on the truck he collapsed on the floor, so that's a sign that we feel we saved his life that day. Yeah.
Who did you have on board with your crew?
I had my driver and I had 3 young mothers who they did an amazing job, but I have to admit I was quite angry with myself because I didn't, taking 3 young mothers, but they proved to be as able and strong as any guy I've had.
They were trained firefighters?
They're trained firefighters, and our training jumped in. I told them to get all their, burn-over gear on and their blankets out, and they did all that without a hitch. It was great to see the training click in.
One of them, in fact, was looking after you at one point.
Oh, look, I look at that now and I think they're getting their gear. I'm telling them to get their gear on, and all of a sudden she's thinking of passing gear over to us to make sure we're protected. So it really makes you proud to be, a captain of something like that.
But you wouldn't be totally conscious of what you were confronting when you left to do the rescue, and you suddenly find this blaze on both sides of the road. You look around and there are 3 mothers on board the fire. How do you feel?
Well, I can tell you I felt angry with myself for a few days for taking them in there, but the next day those 3 mothers turned back up to get on the truck, which alleviated some of my anger. I was angry with myself, for putting those girls in such an awkward situation, but they all turned up the next day and they all said to me they felt safe with me as a captain on the truck. So,
See, that's what leadership is about, isn't it? Like, you've got to be trusted. Your crew has to trust you. The town has to trust you. If you call people up and say, "Get out now," they've got to trust Charlie Magnuson, right?
Yes, and that's one thing I've learnt with the leadership over the last 4 years. It's not just about me leading a couple of people on a truck. The community do look to you for some sort of leadership, especially in these sort of conditions, what's happened lately. And yes, your crew, if your crew don't trust you, you've lost. You may as well not be the leader. So you've got to always install faith and make sure that they can see that you're strong and your decisions are right. Don't ever second guess yourself. Otherwise, you create fear, so you can't have that.
Okay, let's move forward now to New Year's Eve. It's from that moment on that virtually the south coast, from Nowra in the north all the way down to Eden and then well into Victoria, all of that area was suddenly threatened. What was your role at that time?
We were in a very unfortunate role on the early New Year's Eve because we didn't have any trucks. Our big truck gearbox had failed and they seconded our little truck some days before. So I had 12 people sitting in the shed waiting to do something. I spoke to the district officer trying to find us a truck, but then I got proactive and started ringing around, and I found out from Barrie that they had a spare truck there, it wasn't being used, so we dashed over, got that, and our PC, which is a Ford Ranger, and we headed up to the staging area at Milton. When we got there, we were in for a real shock.
That was the night when so many places were lost. Like there were 90 houses at Conjola Park. There were houses lost at all the way down Mojo, Bateman's Bay, Cabargo.
Yeah, really a devastating day. I know people out there in the community think we're heroes, but realistically we're just as human as everyone else. We feel the emotion of what happened.
Now, that brings us to the second distress call that you had. When did that happen?
Well, as we pulled in with that borrowed truck, we pulled into the staging area. I got out, walked over to the command van, and within minutes he just looked at me. I could hear the radio call from a lady at Bendalong on a bush property saying that, you know, I heard it, all I could say is their skin's melting off them, their skin's melting off them. And the fellow was saying, throw them in the pool, throw them in the pool.
Did you know who they were then?
No, I didn't. I thought we were going, to be honest, I thought we were going in after burnt children, which I then had to make sure my crew were aware before we went in. Only to learn that the guy who was taking the call on the comms, it was his partner who was on the other end, so even more devastating for him. And the commander just looked at me and said, can you go and see what you can do? So we just took off in a borrowed truck and headed up to Bendalong. Road here, the burnout trees, the track was all on fire. As we drove in through here, there was logs and trees coming down. I had two of my guys jumping out all the time to clear the track. It's a bit of a trip in, as you can see. Like, I don't know how long.
Oh, this is the original bush track. I mean, it's really rough. It's a very isolated property.
It is. At the time I thought, oh my God, who would be living in here during the fire? But I was to get a surprise as I got to the property. They are magical to live in until the fire comes. Horrendous to think what they went through before we got there. It was a mini inferno. Obviously, our focus was getting into the home. I recall the radio calls come in from the daughter saying, you're never going to get in here, you're never going to get in here. And, you know, we were adamant we're going to get in.
So this is Bill Egar, right? He's the guy who was driving communications that night?
That's correct.
And his partner was here at the time?
He was, yeah. Okay. Hey, buddy.
Good to see you, mate.
Hi, Bill.
Barry?
You were doing communications that night from Milton?
Correct, yep.
And what's the first that you heard there was a problem here?
My partner Melody's father, Alex, was on the GRN and the government radio network, and he said that his wife had been burnt. I didn't know it was Alex at the time. He didn't identify himself. But seconds later, I heard something in his voice that made me think it's him. I asked him to identify himself, but I couldn't get him back on the radio. And then at that moment, Alex's daughter came on the line, Melody, my partner, and she said, it's me, Mel, they've both been burnt.
She was here?
She was here, yeah, she was here at the time. I said, get him in the pool, like that. And then the line dropped out.
Why did they leave the house, do you know? Leave the house in the first place? The house is intact, as you can see.
Well, Alex spent 20 years as the local brigade captain. All the area underneath here had all been underscrubbed. There was no fuel on the ground anywhere. The normal path of the fire is from the northwest, from this direction. And he felt pretty safe that in this environment. Like, they knew they were going to have their work cut out for him, but he really felt safe with all the work that he'd done around the place.
So it was a wildlife sanctuary. He was going out to tend to the animals?
Yeah, that's correct. So when they saw the fire start to run along through the south here, they realised that this little sanctuary here was under threat. They had a number of animals in here. So they came out to either pull them out of the sanctuary or to put some water on them. At the time, I think they were putting water on them, and then an incredibly unlucky thing happened. And incredibly lucky for my partner Mel. she started choking on the smoke and went round the corner. And in the remaining seconds, June turned and fell over a hose. Seconds later, what I describe as a pyroclastic cloud came through and enveloped them. Seconds after that, they were hit with a massive ember attack. I cannot, Charlie, I cannot imagine what it must have been like.
Charlie, by the time you got here, they were in the house.
I've been reminded they were on the front veranda, but my mind, I was just jumping out of the truck, so they were on the front veranda and being taken into the house, yes.
Right, so what did you then do?
We went straight into the house. A couple of my crew and I went straight into the house to see what we could do for the victims. You know, at that stage, I still did not know that it was Lex and June. I know Lex myself well. I'm still thinking I'm going into children, so you know, my mind is abuzz with my God, you know.
And how did you treat them?
Cling wrap. It's something we've been taught for years now, since there was a horrific fire down Pebbly Beach south of Tamil, Bawley Point, and the paramedics have told us that cling wrap seals the nerve endings or in the burn. It takes away some of the pain, and it contains the skin and lessens the damage between now and getting them to a burn unit. So we had rolls and rolls of cling wrap.
Yeah, June was really sensitive to pouring water on her.
Yep.
And once we started to wrap her in the cling wrap, it reduced the sensitivity.
Oh, huge pain, yeah.
And it took about an hour, did it, for the helicopter?
Once we got out of here, which was a job in itself.
Well, yeah, getting out of here, still, you face the same challenge with the bush road.
And we've got 2 victims on 2 vehicles, and we're semi-treating them as we're going. I know I was hanging over the back of the truck pouring cold water over Lex as we're going out on that same road, and I had to trust my driver that I couldn't watch where he's going. I had my own job with Lex. Then we get out onto Bendalong Road, and there was power poles everywhere, power lines everywhere. So getting down to Manana itself was a task. Then arriving at the Oval, and it took like 45, maybe an hour to get those first chopper in.
It felt like forever.
It did. You know, I was getting angry, not with anyone in particular, but angry at this lady I was holding on the ground, was in so much pain.
You were holding her the whole time, weren't you, pretty much? At
Manana Park, I was down on the ground and I had her the whole time in my lap. If I have to say the one thing that's sort of still playing on my mind was that time. You know, the rest of it is just work. You'd agree. It's a task. Get in, get people out, get them to the choppers. We've done that time and time again, but the prolonged holding of a burn victim who at the time kept saying to me, let me die, was, that's why I get a bit emotional.
That was the sheer pain that she was suffering.
She was in sheer pain. We could do nothing for her. I felt as helpless as, other than cuddling her and trying to talk to her. I think I talked to her a lot. I do recall one thing she said to me before she left in the chopper. She said, I'm going to remember your name, Charlie, for the rest of my life. So I said to her, it's an easy name to remember, but
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that.
But that's the emotional part for me, is I have yet to get over that yet.
Even under that kind of stress, you were telling me before that Lex maintained a sense of humour.
Yeah. In the truck out of here, I'm pouring water on him. As you know, we borrowed the truck, and he said to me, Charlie, you're making a mess of the truck. I said, don't worry about it, Lex, it's not our truck. He just put a smile on his face. As much pain as he was in, he held as strong as anyone I've ever seen through the whole episode. So, yeah,
absolutely.
A great RFS officer there, you know.
Bill, what do you think of this bloke?
Well, it took me about 3 weeks before I could look at him without getting emotional, choking up. Yeah. And the other guys on the crew as well. They're our family now, these guys. Whatever happens to them happens to us, I feel. The courage and the bravery, the sacrifice that they were willing to do for someone. Well, I didn't know them at the time. I'd met you down in Bawley on the fires down there. But I've been struggling with it, you know. It's about sacrifice, and these guys showed incredible love to be able to come in like that and put their lives on the line the way they did. It was incredible, and under Charlie's captaincy, You know, I think, you know, you need leaders, and Charlie is one. Yeah, and he led incredibly on the day, absolutely.
So you put December 5 behind you and then all that happened over the new year, but how have you been since? How have you dealt with it all?
Look, I have to admit, I'm not 100%, and I know quite a few of my crew are not. I'm not sleeping well, and yeah, I'm finding it really difficult to go back to work. You've got to remember, we're on some sort of adrenaline high with the peak of these fires, the amount of fire, the amount of hours we went out. So that is causing me and a lot of my crew, and I'm sure this is happening all over the RFS. I have not come back to what I was, and I know it's a concern to my wife because she can see it. She's said she's heard me in my sleep with some sort of nightmares or something like that. I don't remember them, but it is difficult at the moment to go to work. You're going back to your normal life, and after what we've been through, normal's not cutting it just at the moment.
Is counselling available to you?
Yeah, RFS is very good with that. They've already sent incident teams up here. Once you've been through a critical incident, they send a critical incident team to talk to you, and then they've left us with enough stuff to go and contact plenty of counsellors, which we will do. We've just got to make sure that we're through the worst of it before we do that, so that we can then relax into that counselling. We've been so close over this last 2 months that you're like a second family, and you worry about each other. And we've spent more time together than we have with our own family. So you've just now got a second family that looking after you, and you're looking after them. But my focus is on them, especially the rookies and the young ones. I mean, as I said, I've got 3 16-year-old girls and 3 18-year-olds, a girl and 2 boys. And my focus is to make sure there's no long-term. You know, I'm not young, but they are young, and this could affect them going forward. But hopefully it won't. But you just got to be mindful of your team.
Let's talk about how a fire brigade like this is resourced. Now, what does the government take responsibility for, essentially?
Well, we have basic equipment. We have every bit of basic equipment that you would possibly need. But the RFS, I think they're under-resourced, and leading now where fire seasons are getting longer and more intense, I think the government needs to step up and give the RFS more funding, because we do a lot of our own funding. All the brigades do. We look for donations to get better equipment, more modern equipment. It's, you know, our food, our water, our T-shirts, our caps. We fund all that ourselves, and I think that's where the government's going to have to start thinking about the long-term protection of this country and start funding people like the RFS and just dig into their coffers. You know, it's not the RFS's fault; it's the government.
How are you at fundraising?
Well, we're really good because we're lucky to have a very generous community here. I mean, we, as firefighters, we are a bit embarrassed having to put the cap out, if you might say, to raise money, but we have a very generous community, and they look after us financially and other support as well. So. There are other fire brigades, I think, don't have a great fundraising base, and we try to help them if we have lots of stuff. So, you know, we try to help each other. You know, it's part of a family.
This debate, though, around whether firefighters, volunteers, should be paid, against the argument that maybe the money would be better directed giving you improved resources. Where do you sit on that?
Look, I've not really come across firefighters talking about being paid during the fire. I know it's a hot topic. I think personally, under normal conditions, we volunteer where it's not necessary, but something that goes on for this long, a lot of my guys and girls have been going out with their normal income to be responding on these fires. I think the government has to turn around and say that this is not a standard volunteer response. This is basically an army event, really. If you look at it, this is where you've got soldiers of RFS volunteers putting in, well, almost 2 months of work on and off, and it's over a Christmas and New Year period. How do you sustain that sort of financial loss on your income? You know, the government has to step up and say, well, maybe this is special occasions like this, you do need to pay people.
Now, there was a bit of controversy over the summer, obviously, about the way that the Prime Minister handled the situation. I know you're not a political person, But what was your attitude to that?
Look, yeah, I think the best way to put it is if Scott Morrison wants to have a role model, you know, Shane Fitzsimmons. I mean, he made all the right moves. He said all the right things. He was strong when you needed to be strong. He was compassionate when you needed to be compassionate. And I think if he was to go for Prime Minister tomorrow, that he'd be overwhelmingly voted in. He's surely a role model for all us in the brigades, yeah. What
was it, though, about Scott Morrison's approach that you thought could be improved?
Look, I think he probably just didn't say the right things. And I like to come out and say people were enjoying, you know, going out there on the fires. I mean, we're talking about weeks without spending time.
I think they say they enjoy your work, but you don't.
Look, we enjoy going out on to help people, but when it takes 5 or 6 weeks, you're missing your families over Christmas and New Year, and you've got firefighters dying, both local and international. No one enjoys that. No, he's unfortunately made some comments that probably I'm sure he wish he hadn't.
What is your background? How long have you lived in Bawley Point?
We've lived here about 11 years. Prior to that, I worked for Telstra, and prior to that, I worked for Qantas. So, yeah, coming down here, I thought I'd retire. That sort of ended pretty quick. With this, it's almost a full-time job being a captain of a fire brigade. And then I've taken up some more work as well, just to keep the holiday funding going, yeah.
There's all sorts of leadership. I would regard you as a reluctant leader. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, look, I loved the brigade I've got. Yes, I was reluctant to take it on back in 2016. I thought that I didn't have the experience that maybe others did, but I was coerced or talked into the position, and I just spent my last 4 years trying to grow into the position. So yeah, I don't see myself as a natural firefighting captain. I've just had to work at it.
You regard yourself as a leader, though. You'd have to have that confidence.
With my brigade, they seem to think I've done a great job. So if they think I've done a great job, you can't praise yourself. You've got to go on what other people think. And they keep telling me I've done a great job. So I feel proud that they feel that way, yeah.
We started this interview talking about why Bawley Point was the luckiest village on the coast, and we gave 3 reasons, but there is a 4th. They're lucky to have Charlie Magnuson as their fire captain.
Well, you know, as I said, I'm thankful I did a great job, and I can only be thankful that they feel that way, yeah.
Thanks for the chat.
No worries.
Good night.